The Ukrainians have blown up another ammo depot and they have struck another fuel depot as well. This is happening while the Russians are inventing a breakthrough in the Siversk direction, which doesn't mean they haven't been successful in other parts of the front line, especially in the direction of Donetsk. But it's not just bad news on the ground for the Ukrainians. They do receive some significant aid in the near future. We have fresh announcements for international aid. But we'll talk about this as well as about anything else that has happened over the past 2 days in regards to the war in Ukraine in this situation report. The Ukrainians have struck the oil terminal in Feodosia here on the Crimean Peninsula in the night from the 6th to the 7th of October. It's the biggest oil terminal on the Crimean Peninsula, which is used to supply oil fuel to the military as well. By now, the depot is still burning. After 2.5 additional days, it's still burning. And so far, it's identified that 6 tanks have been struck, detonated, blown up, etc. So the damage is existent, is significant, and is growing at the same time. But that's not all. The Ukrainians have also struck a new ammo depot in Bryansk. Here, the installation has been identified having wooden buildings from past times, so it wasn't modernized. And in satellite pictures that were older, it showed ammo boxes lying around on the ground, which would be an explanation for the secondary explosions that were visible and recorded over the after the attack by the Ukrainians. We'll switch over to the developments along the front line. Here, the Ukrainians have done a counterattack into the town of Obuchovka. We have a geolocation of this here where they have reached the outskirts of Obuchovka. They have reached roughly until here, so the gray zone would have to be extended further to the west. As of now, I cannot confirm that they have taken control over the town again, since they have been pushed out by the Russians. That's already it from the Kursk region itself. That's all that I have. We have changes in Kharkiv though. Here we have a geolocation of the Russians having reached the bridge here over the Vovcha in the southern part of the contested area of Vovchansk. It is unclear whether they managed to gain a foothold here. This is contested area for quite a while, and so far I do not see anything that has changed in this regard. The Russians are also claiming that they have taken full control over the aggregation plant, which is here, aggregate plant, which is here. This was contested for quite a while. As of now, I have no clue about the actual situation there. We have seen in the last situation report that the Russians had reached until here and here with a mechanized attack. So it's possible that by now they could have pushed the Ukrainians over the river again, but as said, as of now I do not have any proof in this regard. Let's switch over to the Eastern Front, and here we have the Russians taking Myasosharivka, Myasosharivka. I'm sorry, I try to pronounce it correctly, but yeah, I always have to exercise it to get it somewhat right. So they have taken Myasosharivka, which is north of Andrivka. It's here in this regard, and we have a Ukrainian mill blogger confirming that the Russians have taken a foothold over that town. So this here has now fallen to the Russians as well. Further south, we have nothing until the Siversky Donetsk, and here we have some very interesting developments. First of all, we have a geolocation of the Russians being in the town of Ryhorivka. The interesting part is though that Ryhorivka is here. So they have been roughly here at this point, which is, as you can see, far behind anything we had before. This led to initial conclusions that the Russians must have had a breakthrough in this regard, probably taken Bilohorivka as well. This, while at the same time we have news from Verkhno-Kamyanske as well, where the Russians have also shown to have a flag planted here as well. This is in the western part of Verkhno-Kamyanske. So while this made the impression of the Russians roughly having taken this here, by now it seems that all of this was a show and mostly invented. First, we have here, excuse me, we have Petrenko, the Ukrainian mill blogger, claiming that it was a sabotage and reconnaissance group that walked there, planted the flag and retreated. Because on this video here, on this geolocation, we actually see Russian soldiers on the ground. And the other part here, this here in Verkhnokamiansk, we do not see that. We see a flag on top of a building, and here he said that it was dropped with a flag. It was dropped with a drone. That is, it was a flag that was placed there with a drone. This wouldn't be the first time. We had that in the past, and the reason for that would be obvious: propaganda, and in case soldiers, for instance, here believe that the Russians are already here, and here they might withdraw on their own to avoid being cut off. This in regards to the recent executions of prisoners of war. You do not want to become a prisoner of war of the Russians, so this could lead to a mass flight from the front line here. At least this would be the logic behind that. By now we have not just Petrenko talking about this, and he's pro-Ukrainian, so he might deny the facts, make it look better to avoid admitting a breakthrough. Now we have Riba. Riba is one of the most influential Russian mill bloggers, government affiliated, so they are pro-Russian as one can be. And they are basically saying there is no talk of any control of this area yet. They confirm that the Ukrainians have solid control over Bilohorivka, which is synonymous with a cemetery because they are so successful in defending there. Basically, they are saying it's all a fantasy. They say we would love it to be true, but it is not. So interestingly enough, the Russians tried to make the impression that they had taken probably all of this here by now, and in actuality, it does not seem to be anywhere close to the true. Maybe some minor local advances, and obviously it's significant that a Russian troop, even a small group of just 2 to 4 men, can advance along that line here and retreat successfully. This is roughly 4 kilometers each way, so that's very well doable by foot, but it's still remarkable that the Russians managed to pull it off. But it does not mean that Bilohorivka has fallen or that the Russians have broken through the Serebryansk forest and crossed the Seversky Donetsk. So in all, it seems to be a mostly invented operation in this regard. But that doesn't mean all is good, though. While this is obviously good news for the Ukrainians that the Seversk direction is still holding, we have news from the south here. In Donetsk, the Russians have advanced significantly inside of the town. We already have the deep state map admitting that roughly this part has now fallen to the Russians, but this isn't all. We have the map here, and we have a position to the northeast of it. This is geolocated, so we are now talking about roughly at this point here we have the Russians. But we also have them here and here, which is more or less here and here. So by now we can assume that the Russians control at least this part here and probably this. There are pro-Russian mappers that already claim that the Ukrainians have withdrawn from the whole southern part here. This I cannot confirm yet, but we have visual evidence of the Russians being significantly inside that quarter here, and this is likely because of a Ukrainian withdrawal that they managed to push through here, and the Ukrainians here just sit and watch seems unlikely. And if it is the truth, if the Ukrainians have lost the positions in the center here, then they have to counterattack or they have to withdraw everything they have here in this area. Otherwise, they risk being encircled in this area. So in Donetsk, a significant part of the town has probably fallen to the Russians in the past 48 hours. Further to the west, I have no confirmation, no new news about New York here and the Russians there. And even from the Pokrovsk region, the advances are somewhat limited. We have the Russians now taking more of Tsukuryne. Here we have a Ukrainian mill blogger confirming it, that they managed to advance, and we have another Ukrainian mill blogger saying that it's occupied by now. This I cannot fully confirm yet, but it seems that Tsukuryne is probably fallen. I'm not sure where the poultry farm is. This might be this here, but then it would be another confirmation that the last part of Tsukuryne, which was still held by the Ukrainians has fallen, so meaning the Russians are advancing further to the west, south of Selidove, and are continuing their process of bypassing Selidove, and with the obvious goal to force the Ukrainian to achieve a turning maneuver here, to force a Ukrainian withdrawal from Selidove. Further south in the direction of Kurakhove, we have the report that Maximilianivka has been conquered, half of it roughly by now. This is confirmed by both sides, so probably until this year, more or less, it should be under Russian control as well. With the Russians north of it, it seemed likely that the Ukrainians had to withdraw due to the pressure, and the current front line is probably somewhere like this here. This should all be under Russian control at this moment by now. Further south, in the direction of Vuhledar, we have the Russians advancing north of Vodiane. Not a significant advance, but they are now here in the tree line and have pushed somewhat north to it. Somewhat north of it, as you can see here, not a significant change here, and by now it is confirmed that the Russians have solidified the control north of Vuhledar. The area here, we saw it in the last situation report that only this was mentioned to be occupied. Obviously, as I said, I can't think that the and I can't imagine that the Ukrainians are still in the forested areas directly north of Vuhledar, and by now it's confirmed that the Russians have taken full control over it. While the Russians are having successes here at Vuhledar, they also had some in the direction of Kamyanske. Here they managed to gain a foothold, and clearly they solidify it. Now we have additional positions here in the southwestern part of it. Here the Russians are now gaining additional ground. We had it last time that the Russians were roughly here. Now we have them here. We can expect that this is by now controlled by the Russians and under their firm control. Other than that, I have no changes along the front line. When we talk about the overall situation, Kharkiv is significant there because the Ukrainians are saying the Russians have used over 100 APCs and big amounts of infantry in the past week, which would indicate that Russia is giving more attention to the Kharkiv area, and we might expect more attacks there in the near future. As in the past, it has been a sideshow for both sides. Not too many attacks, not too big attacks in the past, but now the Russians seem to have brought in reinforcements into this area. Then also Russia has blocked Discord, the app that is including a forum as well as voice and video chat options. Because Discord is not obeying Russian laws. The mill bloggers are complaining because apparently Discord, an app made for gaming, is being used along the front line to stream drone pictures. This is how warfare happens in the 21st century from the Russian side. We heard that in the past, that the Russians are using Telegram for military communication. Now we have them using Discord for video streaming of drone footage to communicate among each other, which by now does not seem to be possible anymore. Partisan sabotage activity, we also have. The Ukrainians are saying the GUR, their military intelligence, has sabotaged a Russian minesweeper, the Alexander Obukhov, which is part of the Baltic Fleet. According to them, they somehow managed to do something with the exhaust, and water entered the engine and damaged it significantly. So the ship will need a long time in the dockyard to be repaired, as the engine seems to be rare and difficult to maintain, and spare parts should be difficult. So according to the Ukrainians, they managed to sabotage a minesweeper, probably in St. Petersburg. In troop generation, we have more interesting news, because we have the Russians here, Interfax, saying that in Belgorod now you get 3 million rubles for signing a contract. This is on top. On top, you also get another 400,000 by the federational government, so by Moscow itself. 3 million ruble is by far the highest sum that was promised to others. In the past, we had 1.9 million in Moscow, and it shows once again that Russia's aim to recruit volunteers is getting more and more troublesome, as they have to increase the prices all the time, obviously leading to a wage inflation and more problems down the road. 3 million rubles are roughly, what, $33,000 just for signing a contract in a country where the average wage should be around $700 a month. Then we have South Korea believing that North Korean soldiers are already dying for Putin. That's what South Korea believes. They think the North Koreans have already sent soldiers. In other articles, I read that it's probably mostly more about gaining combat experience. So what we should not expect, at least as of now, is that the North Koreans have sent divisions upon divisions. It's probably small groups that gain experience, that see how war is currently happening on the front line against Ukraine, to learn from that, to allow them to adjust their doctrine, their equipment, etc. in this regard. But this would be a confirmation for the North Korean soldiers that supposedly have died after a Ukrainian cruise missile or a rocket strike. We also have news from Ukraine. Ukraine wants to increase its drone production by exporting them. This sounds counterintuitive, but it makes perfect sense if you look into it. Drone production is so the capacities for drone production have risen so much in Ukraine that the government can't pay for them anymore. By allowing those companies to export, despite being in a war where you actually need every single weapon, this would allow the companies to produce more, make more profit, and thus allow for more domestic production. So it might actually be that Ukraine starts exporting weapons while being in a war for its existence, a rather counterintuitive, but in itself fairly logical thing. As we talked about it in the past, Ukraine itself said they can only pay for 1/3 of their own capacity when it comes to arms production, so they could produce 3 times as much as they currently are, simply because they don't have the funds to do so. In political sphere, we have this here. This is from Lithuania, where they show the fortifications towards Russia. I guess they will still connect it with chains in the future, because this doesn't seem to be too sensible in the way it is right now. But the interesting part is in the text. They say that fortifications are progressing as planned, with some bridges set to be demolished. They even want to demolish some bridges, and here they are saying firepower in case it's needed to stop and destroy the enemy. We are at a point where the Lithuanian Ministry of Defense is no more mincing words. They're talking about an enemy where everyone knows who that enemy is. And we have news from Kamala Harris. She talked about, she had an interview at 60 Minutes, and for Ukraine, the relevant part was that she will not negotiate with Putin about Ukraine if Ukraine is not sitting on the table as well. This is obviously good news for Ukraine and essential. If you want to see Ukraine as a sovereign nation, you need to treat it like a sovereign nation too, and for that you can't simply make a deal with Russia while ignoring its existence. In international aid, we have the confirmation now that Mirage 2000 fighter jets, multi-role jets, will go to Ukraine in the first quarter of 2025. The Mirage 2000 is depicted here, is roughly equivalent to an F-16. The versions are a little bit older, and when it comes to weaponry and upgrades, it's probably a little more constrained than the F-16 because of the lower production numbers, but it's still a capable plane that is still in use by various nations, and Ukraine will be one of the users from next year on. Also, the US government has signed a new big contract with Lockheed Martin for GMLRS. Those are the guided missiles for the HIMARS system in a volume of $4.1 billion. This will include the increase of production. While this is not meant directly at Ukraine, it still will obviously allow more exports to Ukraine if the production capacity is increasing and if more is being produced. And then we have the United Kingdom giving subsidies for exports of £3.5 billion to Ukraine. Subsidies for exports sounds kind of weird, but it's, from my understanding, it's basically said that you can order for £3.5 billion in the United Kingdom and we are going to pay for it. And Ukraine has already started to order weaponries. The talk was about barrels and for artillery, and about air defense ammunition in British factories, and the British taxpayer is going to pay for that, aiding Ukraine's financial difficulties. And Germany has announced they're going to give Ukraine an additional 21 minesweeping vehicles. The talk is about that they will receive Wiesent 1 ARVs. those are the Bergepanzer 2, which are ARVs. The 21 of them will be taken from Bundeswehr stocks and will be remodeled into Wiesent 1, which is a minesweeping tank, which will then aid the Ukrainians in operations like in Kursk, where we have seen them in operations in the past. And here we finally have some pictures of the 47th Mechanized Brigade showing their M1 Abrams. And as you can see, they did the thing that we expect from Ukrainians. They stuck Contact 1 wherever it fits. It's all around, including a fence against drones. We have the modification that we all expected here, Contact 1, all over the tank itself. But that was it from me for now for today's situation report. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment what do you think about the current developments. And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.